Following the election, Liberal Prime Minister Mackenzie King tried to stop the CCF's momentum by offering Coldwell a seat in his cabinet. He even hinted that Coldwell could become the Liberals' next leader, thereby becoming the Prime Minister of Canada. Unlike other times in his life when he mulled things over, Coldwell immediately refused King's offer. He clearly wanted to slam that door shut and throw away the key. He later stated that if the country needed me in the Prime Minister's chair, then it would be as the head of a Co-operative Commonwealth Federation government and not as a member of a party with views in politics contradictory to those in which I believe. Hi, and welcome to episode 14 of Season 1 of Social Democrats of the North, presented by the Broadbent Institute's Perspectives Journal podcast series. I'm your host, Dave McGrane, a professor of political science at St. Thomas More College at the University of Saskatchewan and member of the Perspectives Journal Editorial Committee. From Confederation to the Quiet Revolution, Social Democrats of the North takes you on a journey through history to discover the lives and ideas of the leaders who have shaped Canadian social democracy. It highlights the importance of social democracy in Canadian history and provides you with lessons for your own activism. In the last episode, I looked at Moses Coady, who was a Catholic priest and a pioneer of social democracy in Atlantic Canada. In this episode, we are going to shift our attention to federal politics. As I described in previous episodes, Canada's first major social democratic party was the Co-operative Commonwealth Federation, or the CCF, that was founded in 1933. The CCF was built through the efforts of thousands of workers, farmers, and ordinary Canadians. And one of its most dedicated activists was Major James Coldwell, or M.J. Coldwell. From the very beginning of the CCF to its transformation into the NDP in 1961, Coldwell was there every step of the way. M.J. Coldwell was born in Seaton, England in 1888. His father owned a small farm that grew wheat and hops. Despite the occasional financial difficulties of his parents, Coldwell remembered his childhood as a very happy one. Even though his parents were not rich, they scraped together enough money to send Coldwell to a high school in a neighboring city. When it came time for Coldwell to attend university, his family's money was running low. But he was able to attend extra university by working as a teaching assistant as he studied. He eventually entered Teachers College at the university in 1907. Coldwell came from a very conservative family, so he was surprised when his professors and fellow students started to espouse what he considered to be radical socialist ideas. At first, he tried to prove the radicals wrong and defend his conservatism. However, he listened to them more and more and read some of the books that they recommended, and he slowly started to question his own beliefs. Over the course of a couple of years, he slowly did a 180-degree turn, and he became a supporter of the newly formed British Labour Party. After he graduated with a teacher's certificate, he sat down to consider all of his options and to make a plan about what to do next. He initially wanted to go to Australia to teach, but his uncle had been to the Canadian Prairies twice. He convinced Coldwell that the Canadian Prairies were the land of endless opportunity and possibility. Coldwell followed his uncle's advice and applied to teach in Alberta. He was soon on a ship sailing to Canada with a plan to save enough money while he was teaching there to come back in 5 years to marry his girlfriend, Nora, and return with her to Canada. He arrived in New Norway, Alberta in 1910. Where he started teaching in a small and primitive one-room school surrounded by farmland. Everything went according to plan, and he returned to England to marry Nora and bring her back to Canada. The newlyweds settled in the small farming village of Setley, Saskatchewan, where both taught at a local school. But they wanted a more urban setting, and they moved to Regina in 1914. Coldwell found a job as a principal of a school in a working-class area in the north part of Regina. He had a quiet but firm approach with students. While World War I had made unemployment rare, the low wages paid to Regina workers meant that their families lived in poverty and their neighborhoods lacked all modern amenities. There were no sidewalks, and the houses could become deathly cold in the winter and overwhelmingly hot in the summer. The water had a terrible odor, and it was difficult to drink due to calcium and magnesium deposits. During this time period, teachers' salaries were very low, and Coldwell lived in the same impoverished conditions as his pupils and their families. By the end of World War II, Coldwell resolved to do something about this situation. It was time for him to step up. However, Coldwell was not one to move hastily and without due consideration the consequences of his actions. He liked to make a plan first. After much thought, he decided on a two-pronged approach. First, Coldwell noticed that teachers did not have a union in Saskatchewan. So he helped found the first teachers' union in the province and linked it up with the national body that represented all teachers' unions in Canada. He then worked his way up in union politics. By 1924, he was one of the main leaders of the Canadian Teachers Federation, the umbrella group for all teachers' unions in Canada. Through his union involvement, he succeeded in increasing the wages and bettering the working conditions of teachers not only in Saskatchewan but all over the country. Second, he ran for Regina City Council and was elected as an alderman in 1921. Coldwell became one of the first teachers to be elected at any level of government in Saskatchewan, and some local conservatives claimed it was inappropriate and even illegal for a school principal to be elected to office. A constitutional lawyer was called in, and local conservatives were informed that the only way to get Coldwell out of office as an alderman was to defeat him in an election. Though they tried their best, the conservatives failed to do so. Due to his popularity in working-class areas, Coldwell won the next 4 elections for alderman and became a fixture on Regina City Council. He was one of the first politicians in Canada to embrace what is called gas and water socialism. That is, he took a quiet approach that focused on very practical matters of concern to his voters, like providing clean water and affordable electricity. Due to his efforts, working-class life in Regina was made slightly more comfortable, and students from working-class families came to school more prepared to learn. In the middle of the 1920s, Coldwell was becoming interested in moving beyond municipal politics. His involvement in union politics and on Regina City Council had made a difference, but there was so much more to be done. He felt like he was patching a single leak in a dam full of cracks. After careful consideration, Coldwell concluded that a powerful and long-lasting social democratic political force was needed at the provincial and national level in Canada. So he stepped up again and made the fateful decision to leap into federal provincial politics. Initially, he was not successful. He ran for the Progressives, which was a farmers' party, in Regina in the 1925 federal election, but he did not even come close to winning. He then decided that urban Saskatchewan needed its own social democratic party. So he founded the Independent Labour Party of Saskatchewan in 1926. However, none of the party's candidates were elected. All of a sudden, the Great Depression hit in 1930, and everything changed overnight. Farmers' organizations in Saskatchewan had been very hesitant to become directly involved in politics during the first 30 years of the 20th century. But when the price of wheat sank like a rock thrown into the ocean, they became desperate. The main farmer organization in Saskatchewan approached Coldwell. Its idea was that the Independent Labour Party of Saskatchewan and farmers' organizations should work together to create a brand new farmer labor party that would run candidates in the next provincial election. Coldwell accepted the proposal, and the Farmer Labor Group was born. The first order of business for this new party was to find a leader. George Har Williams was the president of Saskatchewan's main farmers' organization and was the natural choice for leader of the Farmer Labor Group. After all, there were many more farmers than there were laborers in Saskatchewan during the 1930s. However, as I outlined in my episode on Williams, he was considered too radical to lead a new party because he had visited the Soviet Union. It was decided that Coldwell would be a more acceptable alternative for voters because he was moderate and respectable and an alderman on Regina City Council. Coldwell was a calm lake compared to Williams, who was a raging and stormy ocean. So Coldwell was asked to step up once again. However, taking up the position required Coldwell to give up his roles as an alderman and as a representative of his union, and this would lead to a sharp drop in his income. After some hesitation, he decided to go for it. Very shortly after the Farmer Labor Group was formed, a large number of social democrats from around Canada started gathering their forces to form the Co-operative Commonwealth Federation, or the CCF. Coldwell represented Saskatchewan and the Farmer Labor Group at the founding meetings of the CCF in 1932 and 1933, and the Farmer Labor Group was soon folded into the CCF. In the span of only a couple years, Coldwell had gone from being the leader of a small Labour Party and an alderman to being the leader of the Saskatchewan section of the CCF. It looked like big things were about to happen for Coldwell's political career. He ran for a seat in Regina in the 1934 Saskatchewan provincial election. But As leader, he spent much of his time speaking around the province and helping other CCF candidates. The result of the election was bittersweet for Coldwell. It was a Liberal landslide. However, the CCF did win 5 rural seats and formed the official opposition in the Saskatchewan legislature. The problem was that Coldwell did not win his seat, and the leadership of the Saskatchewan CCF passed to Williams. It was definitely a low point in Coldwell's life. Not only did he not win a seat in the Saskatchewan legislature, he was experiencing severe financial difficulties and having health problems. He took a leave of absence from teaching and politics to rest up and consider his next move. At first, he decided to leave politics altogether and to go back to being a school principal. However, his wife, Nora, talked him out of it. According to his biographer, Coldwell's wife told him that a man of his abilities owed more to mankind than to work as a school principal, however valuable that might be. She said to him, "The people are counting on you. You must return." Coldwell was convinced to step up once again, and he proceeded to make a plan to get back into politics. After much thought, he concluded that he would never get elected in Regina and that the real popularity of the CCF was in rural areas of Saskatchewan. In the lead up to the 1935 election, Coldwell sent out feelers to many rural CCF constituent associations in Saskatchewan. The message he got back was that several of them would be delighted to have him as their candidate. He decided to run the rural Saskatchewan riding of Rosetown-Biggar, even though he was not a farmer and he did not have any connection to that area of the province. He simply chose Rosetown-Biggar because his speeches had always been well received there when he was leader of the Saskatchewan CCF. It turned out to be a life-changing decision. Not only did he win Rosetown-Biggar in 1935, he went on to be the riding's MP in Ottawa for the next 23 years. It is now a historical fact that the CCF became a well-entrenched and well-established part of Canadian politics that would eventually turn into the party that we know today as the NDP. However, the CCF's organization and future was wobbly when Coldwell became an MP in 1935. There was no guarantee that the party would survive to fight another election. It was like a flame flickering in the wind and threatening to go out at any moment. Moreover, J.S. Wordsworth was the leader of the federal CCF and a legend of social democratic politics in Canada. However, he was beginning to get older and his health was starting to falter. As soon as he became MP, Coldwell stepped up and quickly assumed the role of Wordsworth's chief lieutenant. He worked quietly behind the scenes to keep the CCF caucus united and ensure that the party was functioning well. Soon it became apparent that Coldwell was indispensable for the future success of the federal CCF. When Wordsworth fell ill in 1940, Coldwell became interim leader, and he was asked to step into the role of being the permanent leader in 1942. When Coldwell took over, the federal CCF was floundering like a swimmer struggling to keep their head above water. So he made a plan to identify and solve the party's problems. First, the CCF was struggling financially and organizationally. Therefore, Coldwell made sure that riding associations were functioning all around the country and that the party was on solid financial footing. Second, and maybe more important, the CCF was struggling to define what it stood for. The party was badly divided on the question of if Canada should be participating in World War II. Coldwell soon put any doubt about the CCF's position on the war to rest. He declared that the CCF stands united behind the forces of democracy in the world struggle. It recognizes that the defeat of fascism is the only way to preserve humanity. Let our slogan be total mobilization for total war and nothing less. He then wrote a book called Left Turn Canada that clearly defined the political philosophy of the CCF for voters. I don't have time to explain the whole book, but I can give you a very high-level summary. The starting point of the book is that, coming out of World War II, Canada possesses the technological and industrial capacity to produce enough goods and services to sweep poverty and unemployment into the dustbin of history. However, Canada's potential is going unrealized because way too many Canadians are impoverished and jobless for Canada to be classified as a compassionate society. As Coldwell puts it, Canada is failing in its collective responsibility to ensure that all citizens are free from want and hunger. There are two solutions to the situation, according to Coldwell. One solution has to do with social policy, or what Coldwell called social security. He says that Canada needs a cradle-to-the-grave welfare state consisting of Medicare, public education, public pensions, and unemployment insurance. The other solution has to do with economic policy. In an attempt to portray a pragmatic image to voters, Coldwell reassured them that the CCF does not endeavor to end capitalism. He explicitly stated that the CCF wants a large and vibrant private sector of profitable businesses, and he ensures small businessmen that they are welcome to join his party. But he does not want the private sector to act all by itself to improve Canada's economy. Rather, he sees Canada's economic development being pushed forward within a mixed economy where the private, public, and cooperative sectors work together to create high economic growth and end unemployment. In particular, Coldwell argues for the federal government to facilitate cooperation amongst different economic actors through economic planning. For instance, he calls for the establishment of a publicly owned bank to loan money at low interest rates to private businesses and cooperatives to allow them to expand and to create more jobs. Coldwell wasn't flashy, but it was clear that his leadership was pushing the federal CCF to levels of poverty it had never seen. Though polls were very rudimentary at the time, a Canadian Institute of Public Opinion survey in 1943 showed that the CCF was the most popular federal party with about 30% of voting intentions. The Liberals were in the mid-20s and the Conservatives were in the low 20s. Then, under the leadership of Tommy Douglas, the CCF won the 1944 provincial election in Saskatchewan by a landslide. Was the unthinkable happening? Could Coldwell become the first CCF Prime Minister in Canadian history? The party's spirits could not have been higher going into the 1945 federal election. And Coldwell did not disappoint. He ran an exceptionally well-planned and well-organized campaign by all accounts. And while the CCF did not get all that close to forming government, it did have its best electoral showing ever. It won 28 seats and 16% of the popular vote. The results definitely rattled the federal Liberals. Following the election, Liberal Prime Minister Mackenzie King tried to stop the CCF's momentum by offering Coldwell a seat in his cabinet. He even hinted that Coldwell could become the Liberals' next leader, thereby becoming the Prime Minister of Canada. Unlike other times in his life when he mulled things over, Coldwell immediately refused King's offer. He clearly wanted to slam that door shut and throw away the key. He later stated that if the country needed me in the Prime Minister's chair, then it would be as the head of a Co-operative Commonwealth Federation government and not as a member of a party with views in politics contradictory to those in which I believe. Coldwell soldiered on as the leader of the CCF, but his party's electoral fortunes declined throughout the rest of the 1940s and into the 1950s. The CCF was like a marathon runner, falling further behind the race leaders with every passing mile. What was exactly responsible for the CCF's electoral decline after its high point in the 1945 federal election is hard to say. A book by John Boyko called Into the Hurricane documents how Canada's business community ran a massive advertising and propaganda campaign to discredit the CCF following the 1945 election. Also, the Cold War emerged, and there was a general wariness of any party that seemed to be even a little bit left-wing, and that included the CCF. Further, the federal Liberals ended up implementing some of the CCF's social policy in watered-down form. Examples included small family allowances, pensions for widows only, and a government subsidization of basic medical services. This co-opting of the CCF's ideas allowed the Liberals to steal soft CCF voters away from the party. Finally, the CCF was never able to gain any popularity in Quebec, a situation not helped by Coldwell's inability to speak French. Whatever the reason, by the 1958 federal election, the CCF's popular vote had fallen to 9.5%, and the party had been reduced to 8 seats. Coldwell even lost his own seat. He had stepped up repeatedly throughout his political life, but now the writing was on the wall that it was time for him to step down. Coldwell resigned as the CCF's leader, paving the way for the creation of the NDP in the early 1960s. He retired from politics and died in 1974. M.J. Coldwell may not be talked about a lot today, but he played an enormously important role in Canadian political history. In the formative years of the CCF, its continued existence was shaky at best. Its political philosophy was not completely clear, its organization was underdeveloped, and it was under constant attack by big business interests. As federal CCF leader, Coldwell was able to establish the CCF as a permanent part of the landscape of Canadian politics in the face of all of these obstacles. In my opinion, all of his efforts ensured that the CCF did not become an obscure footnote in Canadian political history. Through its transformation into the NDP, the CCF remains with us today and has played a massive role in Canadian politics over the years. Who knows if that would have been the case without all the work done by Coldwell. The lesson for our activism today from Coldwell's life is twofold. First, someone needs to step up and do the hard work of building a social democratic Canada. Coldwell saw injustices and did not back away from becoming politically involved to solve those injustices. But Coldwell's life provides a second lesson as well. He stepped into important leadership roles in the Canadian social democratic movement, but he did not do it hastily without proper consideration. He made a plan about how he could be most effective and then follow through with that plan. Plan first, then act. That was his motto. After all, political activists without a plan is like a traveler without a map. They will only become lost and never get to their destination. I'm Dave McGrane, and thanks for joining me on Social Democrats of the North, a Perspectives Journal podcast series by the Broadbent Institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or leave a review on the Perspectives Journal podcast on all major podcast platforms and share it with someone you know who loves Canadian political history. And subscribe to Press Progress's award-winning Sources podcast that digs deeper into news stories you won't find in any major newspaper. The Perspectives Journal podcast and Sources are proud members of the Harbinger Media Network, Canada's progressive podcast community. You can read more about social democracy in the Perspectives Journal, a publication of the Broadbent Institute, by visiting perspectivesjournal.ca. And for more information on the Broadbent Institute's work, subscribe to our mailing list at broadbentinstitute.ca/subscribe. Next time we will talk about a British Columbian who defied all odds to become the first status Indigenous person to be elected to a Canadian legislature. Until then, keep questioning the status quo and stay social democratic.